Shandani Kistani, author of the books Eerie Tales 1 and 2, received a strange report in the early 2000s involving a police officer named Terrence. Now retired, Terrence felt it was time to tell his story of what he encountered one afternoon while out on patrol in the Australian Outback. Terrence claims that at the time he was out perusing a remote area on his BMW R1150 RT police bike. It was dusty and he decided to pull off on the first adjacent road and clean the collected dirt off his visor. The road was quiet and he noted that trees lined both sides of the road. He took a sip of water and proceeded to use the water to clean off his gear. As he looked around the isolated lane, he began to hear the faint sound of an engine roar. The burring sound was coming from the far end of the road. He slipped on his helmet and inched his bike forward. The roaring sound became louder. Ahead, near a bend, was a raised earth platform. He assumed it was reserved housing estate land. Although he couldn't see the source of the sound from the road level, a rising cloud of dust made it obvious that the sound was coming from the higher ground. Terrence proceeded to stop his bike and make his way up the steep slope. He struggled to make the 2-meter climb, using his hands to pull him over the edge of the slope. He glanced over and observed, about 50 meters away, an old black 1953 Chevrolet going around in circles. Terrence tried to see if the driver was all right, wondering if he may have had a heart attack or had something that rendered him unconscious, but the sun's glare on the Chevy's windscreen and the red cloud of dust surrounding the car made it impossible. Concerned, Terrence pulled himself over the slope and stood on the edge of the plateau. He could see everything. He didn't know why a car would be going in circles like that, and given where he was certain the driver could see him and must have recognized that he was a cop. For whatever reason, the driver kept going in circles. Terrence waved at the driver to get his attention, but the driver never stopped. I wonder if the driver has been shot and his foot remains weighted down on the accelerator pedal, or maybe some hoons are playing around with a stolen car, or maybe this, or maybe that. I forced myself to stop assuming and gather the courage to investigate. As Terrence made his way toward the vehicle, he began to get a cold chill up his spine. He looked into the window, and occasionally when the glass was not reflecting the bright light of the sun, he was able to make out that there were 2 very large people with long hair inside, sitting in the front seats. Given the length of the hair, Terrence assumed that they might be females, but big ones. Terrence approached the vehicle cautiously, getting to within 20 meters when the vehicle stopped. For some reason, Terrence recalled that the sight of the stopped car frightened him, and he actually considered turning around and leaving. He didn't. Waiting until the dust settled, Terrence was finally able to get a good look at the 2 people inside the car. He ordered them out of the vehicle, but they did not move. Terrence began to grow angry and ordered them a second time to exit the vehicle. This time they did. As they stepped out, he could see them clearly. Their faces were expressionless. They stood easily 7 feet tall. The strangest thing? They looked exactly alike. They were also both wearing sunglasses, although these were unlike anything Terrence had ever seen before. I have never seen mirrored glasses that shine like them. They vary in their colors, sometimes blue, sometimes red, sometimes a shade of green, and even reflect a peculiar sound, a machine-like ringing sound. What makes it strange is that the ringing only happens when I see the glare of the sun in the mirrored lenses. The sound seems to come out from my own ears. Terrence became increasingly more frightened as the situation progressed. Though his training allowed him to maintain a straight face, he hadn't pulled his weapon yet, fearing that the 2 men would assume he was a threat. As they stared at each other, the 2 men suddenly sidestepped away from the Chevy so that they were now fully exposed. The weird thing to Terrence was that when they stepped away from the vehicle, it was completely in sync, like he was watching a mirror image of the same person. Both men wore torn, mud-stained jeans held up by leather belts, and disheveled shirts neither tucked in nor out. Terrence wondered if they were playing with him. Just then, the 2 men began to walk towards him, their arms at their sides. Terrence ordered them to halt, but they didn't. They continued to advance in his direction. Feeling his life was in danger, Terrence ordered them to stop and raise their hands. Even though they are not carrying weapons, I feel nervous, and I tremble with every step they take closer to me. Since they haven't stopped, I feel no other choice but to draw my weapon, and I do. As the 2 lanky figures get closer, moving in sync, Terrence can see even clearer now how they appear to be mirror images of each other. They seem unfazed by the gun. Eventually the two men stepped away from each other, moving away at angles as if to get around the officer. Since they were not carrying firearms, Terrence allowed them to continue to walk apart and encircle him. They walked to within 20 meters of either side of him, eventually forming a straight line on either side of him. Terrence became quite uncertain of what to do. If they both came at him, would he have time to defend himself, he wondered? The two men just kept walking, eventually turning their faces away from him, as if he wasn't there. This angered Terrence, who ordered them to stop. They did not. He even assumed that maybe they were deaf, which was why they were not responding to his commands. Terrence watched as they continued to walk up the slope away from him. Then they did something so bizarre, it caused Terrence to question if what he was seeing was real. They stop right at the edge of the plateau. They are in coordination no matter what they do. Then their heads turn. Just the heads, not the bodies. I get ready to shout out, "Get on the ground," but they do something that shoots icy arrows up my spine. Their heads have turned as much as any human's head can turn, but they don't stop there. Their heads turn some more. They have now turned 180 degrees, but they still do not stop. Their heads have turned a complete circle 360 degrees. These men can't be humans, I scream in my head. The sight of this became too much for the officer, who fell to his knees. My knees jellify and hit the ground. My face is numb, and my jaw hangs loosely as my vision spirals. With absolute indifference to a nervous gun pointed at their backs, the spindly giants calmly walk down the slope and disappear behind the dirt horizon. Seeing them gone, I am able to breathe again. In the midst of the excitement, I had forgotten about the Chevy. Turning around, Terrence was shocked to see that the Chevy was gone. It hadn't driven away on its own, nor was it buried in the sand. It was just gone. From there, things went off the rails. Terrence remembered feeling an intense desire to vomit. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, it was now dark out. When he knelt down, it was still the afternoon. However, when he opened his eyes, seconds later, it was now nighttime. He was still in the kneeling position. God, how long have I been kneeling like this, he wondered. He eventually returned to his motorcycle and left the area. Fearing ridicule by his fellow officers, Terrence never spoke of the bizarre incident. He waited until he was retired to tell Author Castani about the experience.